Jaun Andreok ongi etorri izan zaitezte Azkuna zentrua.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the International Literature Festival Gutun Zuria. She repeats in English. In this edition, as have we said on the first day, the work goes beyond frontiers, the frontiers of the pages of a book, and starts a dialogue with different artistical disciplines. And this is what we prove here. Workshops and meetings with editing houses and publishing houses, and the exhibition Never Real, Always Truth. Well, we are enjoying all this with complicity and with your participation that I would like to acknowledge once again. Today, this is a final talk with Iñaki, Esteban, one of our advisors, that will have a talk with Vila-Matas and Kopf under the title The Images That Explore the Abysm, or the abyss. And then at 9, there will be a book signing and a concert by Rafael Lechowski. Vila-Matas thinks that writers are artists, and he can take 6 artworks and recreate from there his memoir. And it is difficult to find another writer that in such a natural way sort of has deleted the border in between art and literature. Alicia, she is a teacher and artist in different disciplines, and she is concerned by the idea of exploration. Her novel, Sister of Vice, Hermana de Guerra, is about the relationship between art and literature. And Iñaki Esteban, he's a philosopher, he's a teacher, and he's got many awards, but especially he's also a journalist, and today he's our conductor. So thank you very much, and a round of applause for our guest.
Aún hoy, en la media luz de esta mañana que nace, oigo las risas del pasado.
I still hear the laughter of the past, and get some words that I thought were forgotten that come back to remind me of the monologue of my brother Rainer. All these sentences that seem to wanted to pay tribute to the language of our masters, that I found out that they were thousands of miles away from those genes, but that could summarize their literary style, and could prove some of the defaults and some of the also advantages of that style. Changes that meant different rhythms, intensities, but everything got to me just with its natural incapacity to communicate with words. With all this, in that chaotic monologue, there were also some moments of brightness, when he said that he would rather not think, because otherwise he would have to program himself, or when he said that he reached the conclusion that when the dominant when he reached to the conclusion that it was terrible what those in command could do with those that were their slaves, and also the other way around. Everything was terrible at the end of the day. Or when he wondered himself, when maybe in the future somebody will replace his DNA, maybe he will be weakening his identity. There, I had to think for a while. It was like Molloy. And here I was really thinking, and I thought that maybe writing was to justify yourself without anybody asking you for such a justification. And that was something always very sort of funny. And also when he said that he loved literature and writers, and that was his world, but that he had to get deep in this issue and say that those authors that he liked and didn't like, that were like his idols, and those that he hated, those that really thought that they were very clever, and also those that were very silly, those that were really believers, and also those that were cheaters, that were beggars. So if he would think deeper about it, he would laugh about all of them, because in every reader, he said there was a little voice telling oneself that everything you can read, even it was very extraordinary, well, no way. First, I saw some iceberg floating in the swimming pool, and in the bottom, I saw some narwhal corns. In the water, I would get a piece of ice and I will put it in the water and get it out. It was a dream. Later on, at the Musée Orsay de Paris, I would say some polar caps in the blue tutus of the Degas dancers. And then I learned that Arctic, comes from Arcticos in Greek, close to the bear. And Antarctic, there are no bears, but penguins. And that poles or caps are the places where the compasses get lost. And the north is the main cardinal point that is mobile. And in the caps, or in the poles even, the floor moves. So I guess the explorers in the previous century were explorers looking for the Holy Grail. Joseph Conrad said that they were very pure as the air in those latitudes where they were breathing. But those men were more alike to us than we could think of, because maybe they risked their life for this mission, but in their diaries they wrote that they also would make mistakes and tell lies. Many died trying to reach places that some other people said wrongly that they had been to. So there's this controversy on who discovered the North Pole. Beyond some not very probable facts that happen in a precise moment, there is the word of somebody against somebody else's words. I also, in my iceberg study that is white and with no heating, I'm looking for something, an imaginary point that I do not know about, and therefore absolutely magnetic. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My first question is, what is more male, an iceberg or a volcano?
Buenas noches a todos. Gracias.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming again. Well, this is our 12th edition. This is a special edition. This is a part that complements the exhibition that we have in the exhibition hall with the exhibition title Never Real, Always True, Nunca Real, Siempre Verdadero. So we've got documents, inventions, we've got things that look like something, and then we have all that in the exhibition, but we would like to have all that here on the stage. This is why we invited all these writers, Enrique Vila-Matas and Alicia Kopf. And as we heard in the introduction, she's also a writer, an artist. She exposes before she writes. She usually organizes an exhibition before she writes about something. Then Vila-Matas is the writer that maybe has paid more attention to contemporary art and has made good use of some strategies of the contemporary art, like in Kassel that imitates the logic, and also he has a relationship with Dominique Gonzalez Foister, French artist, and also in his relationship with another conceptual French artist, Fical. It's not a surprise, but it is something that I think is worth talking about, is how in these two writers from different generations there are common aspects. And I am surprised by how young writers pay attention to the writing of Vila-Matas. Juan Vico on Thursday, he mentioned Vila-Matas. And I think they are looking for examples, not the classicals like San Pedro or some others that are very classical. But it seems that these young writers, they are paying attention to somebody so peculiar as Vila-Matas. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see each other? When you have to choose your literary parents, I think you go for those that open the doors, help you open the doors you want to open, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I think the importance of a writer is not his age or her age, but whether he is committed to present. And I think he opens gates at Vila-Matas, and he's very engaged to the present. He is very open to everything that is happening, to art, and he's got a vital commitment to all this. And that is always very updated, to be very real and updated. I write because I am desperate, and that leads me to be curious. And if I review my life, I keep enjoying something that sort of looks new, even if it's not new. This doesn't explain much, because I'm not able to explain much anyway, but I could say that I was fascinated by Alicia's book. The book is Germà de Gel in Catalan. I don't know why I happened to read this book, because this was her first book. I found it, I bought it, I read it, I was fascinated about it, and later I wrote on that book. And I really liked that peculiar combination, an interesting combination that she makes in between her privacy. Maybe she could further elaborate on this. A brother with autism, and the relationship to life, and then the expeditions to the North and South Pole. That means like this is like an adventure towards the unknown. And from here we find a book that is excellent. It was translated into then Spanish, and I think it's been translated into some other 7 languages. Le Monde yesterday in his magazine on books, I think they were talking. There was a review on her book, and it was an extraordinary one, and I'm not surprised because it's an excellent book. It is a very stimulating book. Enrique Vila-Matas has read a couple of pages from his book. This foolish fog. And also There is another book of yours with a funny title. This is like Songs Without Songs. I am a song without songs myself, so I am loyal to that. So these people lived in the political environment and social in an angry way, as they were characters that would respond to what Peter Hanke mentioned in The Weight of the World. So while walking along Paris, and somebody read in a kiosk that Greece had declared the war on Cyprus, and this person then said, "Oh my God, what an annoyance! What an annoyance!" This is what I say also, you know, when somebody switches on the TV at home, I say, well, how annoying. But, you know, somebody declaring war and saying this is because he found this guy that this would have somehow an interaction with his life and didn't like it. Alicia, in your book, we also see those mystifications that are also mentioned in that first page. There is a picture of an image that is one of the explorers, Frederick Cook, if I am not wrong. And he is in a summit, and it looks fake. And you mentioned that game in between the document and fiction within a document, as Foncuberta mentioned on Tuesday. Well, that image that you mentioned, in fact, is not by Frederick Cook. He represented himself, in the North Pole, in a flat area with two Eskimos and a tent with their basic mean. It was his competitor, Robert Peary, at the same year he got to the North Pole. They were getting there in parallel. He got there with more sophisticated mean and with more people, more apparel, and he created this scenography about this conquest, and it was about a summit and a flag. You can imagine that the pole is flat and white, so it is almost invisible from a photographic point of view. So the fact that they created a summit, this means that this is a funny image where two people were playing to build sand castles, but with snow. So behind that, what we have, and in the book precisely, is a research on how these polar adventures at the end of the 19th century up until 1922, coincides with the development of the cinematographic and photographic technologies. So the conquest of the poles is also like a lab of images, and there precisely is the image becomes a way to conquer that area, because nobody is there waiting them to come. There was no referee to say who gets here first. And there were some committees that would only judge what documents were more true. And in those documents, we see photomontage in Frederick Cook's, and there you are right. There was this montage in a previous summit to the one that he reached, so it would look even more difficult to reach and to conquest. But also his competitor, there were some fragments from Jules Verne. And this is fascinating, that the image and the storytelling ends up in something that finally is part of history. Later on, it was found out that none of them got to the poles, but the one that was more convincing in his cheating is the one that was sort of declared to be the one to have reached the pole. And there was only one black man that tried to this expedition, and he was a key element, but they didn't let him be in the pictures. So that was very coherent with the white background of all this imaginary of this conquest. So what do you think? They wanted to sort of say, well, I've been here first, or just to win glory? Well, yes, this is something that I wonder, and this is why I moved on with this research, which is personal and also academic. If I've got that will to move on in this white area, because we writers, we look for a path in a white scenario. So why men at a certain moment in time, when they didn't have any mechanic means, they decided to conquer these places where there was nothing to be found. It's not like when they went to the west, they could find gold, but here it is all white and nothing. It's the nothingness, really. And Benjamin Franklin, in 1835, he launched the first attempt to reach the magnetic North Pole, because the northeast route will connect the two continents. So there were some sort of trading interests behind this idea. So this expedition failed, as most of them did. And then the widow decided to launch a campaign to try to retrieve the leftovers of these expeditions. So a whole heroic imaginary was developed about this idea of reaching the north. And from here, world competition was sort of set for all the big powers to see who would have more power to sort of reach that, but not because they wanted to sort of obtain any advantage in particular, but rather because it was about conquering a place, or getting to a place where nobody had ever been before. You receive a real invitation by Chus Martinez and the other curator of the Castle Documenta, so that you exhibit there as a writer. So there's a real reason for it, and from there you say, I'm going to write a reportage about sort of, that looks like a novel. No, I didn't intend to write a novel, says Vila-Matas. Chus Martinez wanted to meet me. I didn't know her, and she invited me, and she said in a year's time there will be the Castles Documenta, and she had thought about having having different writers for some days in a Chinese restaurant in Kassel, writing in front of an audience. And I thought this idea would evolve, and that in some months I would get more information on that, and that finally, when I would be there, I guess something a bit more sort of developed would have be prepared. And I always got the same invitation, even though time was running, and I realized that I had to start writing something in a Chinese restaurant, and I had a look at it on internet. It was on the outskirts of the city of Kassel. I found out that the food there was awful, and I thought also that after my research, only the elderly German bosses will come visit me. So I would have to write in front of these elderly Germans. And I thought, okay, I would write a novel that I would have to write if I was so sort of forced to do so. So I thought that they would send me a message with some more indications, but that was not the case. I only got a message from Villatin, from the Mexican writer, Maria Villatin, that had been in my place some weeks before or earlier, to let me know that we were traveling without any life insurance, that they didn't pay that insurance for the writers, and that he got his computer robbed there. So then I thought that among the elderly there were some thieves, and at home I thought, I'm not going there. And because I didn't see the point, then I decided not to go there with my computer, just in case. But just a pencil and some papers. And that's what I did. That's what I did. I went there to that mystery. It was a bit of a contradiction. It was a real writer doing something that a real writer never does, to write in a Chinese restaurant, as far as I know. Well, I got there. They didn't look at me in a very nice way. They were all Chinese. They looked at me from toe to up to my head. I guess some others got there. Sometimes, you know, I was wondering if they left some traces on the table, like, you know, well, as people do in jail. And I sat there, and a very fat lady, elderly, one of these elderly ladies, she got moved when she found out that I was a writer, and she was sort of hugging me and saying, "Writer, writer," holding me up and down. And then she disappeared mysteriously. And then I realized that I was on the outskirts, that nobody would ever come round to see me as time was running. That I had 5 days ahead. I didn't speak English or German. I didn't know anybody. The people that invited me didn't show up either. So I had to get going on my own. It is a typical up to you now. Yes, it was up to you, as Mr. Martinez said in an interview, because he said in art, this is something like, it is not up to you. It's like contemporary art. Well, up to you. If you understand it, it's okay. If not, up to you. So then there was this nice person that approached me and said they will help me run away from this Chinese restaurant. And I ran away as I would have run away from school. Nobody was watching me. And I realized that it was not mentioned there that that was an event from the Documenta, so nobody would come there to see me. And the Chinese restaurant didn't know either that you were part of the Documenta. No, I didn't write this in my novel because I only found out 2 years later. So the Chinese restaurant didn't sign any contract with the Chinese restaurant. This is why they didn't tell us that we were occupying a table without anybody knowing about us doing this kind of exercise. Had I known this, I would have run away from the very beginning. That's why they were not very nice to us. So both of you, in your novels, you talk about real people, and from them you create a fiction that involves those real people. Cristina Rosenbinge was saying yesterday that it's a responsibility when you talk about somebody else that is alive and about what might happen, like in your case, or like in your mom's case. Do you feel something special? I mean, how do you handle the fact that you're talking in your novels about people that are not really characters of fiction, and you could do anything about them, but I mean, you're talking about real people. I've got to say, says Alicia, that I don't think I am dealing with real people. I mean, my starting point is not truth, and I don't think you know, like the title in this exhibition, never real, always true. this quotation by Antoni Narto. We always write from some basis or some models. If I thought I was telling the truth about somebody, I think that would be very naive to think that in a very limited space and from my external point of view, I can tell the truth about somebody. And this is research. This is about exploring those internal gulfs or abysses that we have, where we might see some images that we can sort of recognize, and that I see them more like silhouettes than like figures. This is why I never use names, but only the initials. And I try to sort of, out of a certain situation or out of an emotional truth, I try to tell something, but I never want to unveil something that would make that person be recognized. Having said this, there are things that, of course, sort of respond to some social realities we might all recognize. Like in my case, for a long time, I wanted to reflect the reality of autism from the point of view of somebody that knows these. In my case, in my family, somebody suffered from autism, and well, still is there. And I never found any valid, to me, as sister references, either in fiction, in the fiction of handicapped or disability, because if we could call them like that, because we're all disabled somehow, like me first of all. But I think the imaginary tries to sort of refuse that reality. Is like Forrest Gump. Maybe his status, but then he's got other capacities, other abilities, and he gets very far. So I think this is a certain reality where we mention this something, what you don't have, and the divides this creates in a family, and also the care that you have to provide to these people. Often nobody talks about this, because I wanted to sort of create an epic of frame. This is why I talk about the epic of the exploration. And this is why I wanted to take that epic adventure into the homes, because usually it's at home where you really lead really epic battles and very meaningful for the ones and the others. And there I would like to pay tribute to people living these realities from a point of view that is not sort of overcompensated or but it is a reality that I've lived myself. Then there are some people that inspire me from these stories, and this is always very complex. In my particular case, as a good journalist, I try to see what can I really see, what can't I see. I never give the voice to somebody else's, or I never take anybody else's voice. So I say, this is myself, and this is as far as I can see things, and then those people appear in my sort of viewpoint, in my angle of vision. But first of all, saying this is a self-fiction, this is not a sub-reality, and I can see some aspects of the emotional truth of that. And there are things that you can also be related to families, and then I try to, when this is about families, show to them what I write before I publish it. In the exhibition, what you showed, there was already that issue of the families, or was it rather about those conquests when you are trying to reach those summits? Well, I always work, she says, starting from a metaphor. In this fragment that I read, I think explains very well that I start with an intuition. There is a metaphor that sort of gets my body, and to me, a dream, my dreams, so dreams are always used as part of reality. To me, dreams are part of reality that is expressed and that sort of goes beyond my consciousness. And I began dreaming of eyes, and then I decided that I had to take that seriously, and I decided to study everything that was related to eyes. What is it made of? How do you produce it? Eyes, landscapes, and until I got to this endurance boat image by Shackleton. And there I started to read different diaries by these polar explorers, and that was my research. But those diaries to me were not a way to explain this conquest, but rather to relate it to my personal moment. And I think this was when I had got my studies done. And it was a financial downturn. There was a financial downturn at the time. Nobody could find a job. So this is why I really needed an epic reference to sort of live through that reality where nobody is acknowledging you. You have no source of stable source of income. You don't have many chances in front of you, so you hold on to whatever. And I hold on to metaphors. In my case, they are very powerful because they open to you doors, gates, and realities. So, well, you know, metaphors took me to where I am now. So I took this metaphor of eyes, and especially of that epic moment from 1920 with that boat surrounded by ice, and take it to the year 2012 when I was in a certain uncertainty myself, when I was sort of drifting myself. So it was like two views, two gaze. This lady, this woman trying to survive in a financial downturn, trying to understand where she was coming from, where she was going to, trying to understand her family and her identity. And then also, you know, she reads those heroes to sort of make that epic adventure her own. Now, I am very much anti-hero and anti-epic because we are fed up of fighting, and now I'd rather dance than fight. But I think we are fed up of fighting and not being acknowledged, especially when we take care of others. And I think now I am in another metaphor, but at the time I was in a moment of a stagnation, and that metaphor helped me out. It was like when you come, you know, with something to break the ice. When friends of yours appear in your books, yes, Peter Hanke was mentioned, and I read Green Letter for a Long Goodbye. It was a wonderful novel, and at the time within the Spanish narrative, it was a novel that was very far away from what my generation was doing, and as a reader I was really shocked by the, so to say, modern tone of that narration by Hanke. He drops his girlfriend and sends a letter, and they met at the end and go pay a visit to John Ford. So I was shocked by the fact that somebody contemporary alive appears in the novel. And John Ford would explain to them what the American epic was about, what being an American was meant. And to me, it was surprising because it was a fiction that ended up in a real person that had maybe the opinion that was reflected in the book, and that was a key thing to me. And this allowed me to turn somebody very well known, like Sergio Pitol, into a character in my book, and then talk about a very weird night that took place in between Jalapa and Veracruz in Mexico some years ago. And this was the first time that I turned a real character into a fiction character in one of my books. Then I did this again and again in many cases, always transforming these characters and turning them into a fiction character in a very unpunished way. Even though some 30 people took revenge on me, I could not count them. I don't feel like counting them. And I think there are some 30 books where I am one of the characters myself. I haven't read all those 30 books. And so I know what it means indifference, because I cannot identify myself to anything at all of what they say in those 30 books. Some people say that I got crossed or angry. It is not like that. It's that I don't see myself in what they say. Everything is so different that I don't think I am responsible of any of the things that the characters say. It depends on your approach, whether people will like what you write about them or not. If you want to take revenge, then you will do your most. But that was never my intention. I never waste my time in such a thing. I think you got like the opposite proposal. Sophie Gal, I think she asked you to write a tale, and she would take it to reality. That is, she will take it from fiction to reality. I guess there is a certain responsibility, because with a character you can do whatever you feel like doing. But then when a character becomes a person, yes, a well-known person from Barcelona, not a friend, but asked me whether Sophie Cal could call me. And some years ago, I met Sophie Cal in an exhibition in Barcelona. I was there as a journalist on that exhibition. She was exposing there something titled "Blind People Giving an Opinion on Beauty." And I was watching that exhibition, and then I saw that a very well-known journalist from Barcelona was there with Sophie Cal, and he's quite a heavy guy, by the way. And I think they were having an argument, and I think she was saying, like, "You please leave." And I had to approach Sophie Cal to make some questions to her, because I was a journalist, and given the circumstances of this colleague journalist, I decided to turn around and leave. Then when I left, I literally could perceive Sophie Cal's eyes in the back of my head. And some years later, I got this friend of mine calling and asking me whether Sophie Cal is asking whether she can call you. So I knew her work, and I said, yes, she can call me. Then she called me, and she only said, "I would like to read you." This was linked to, that she had seen me from the back. And I said, "Well, you are in Paris and I am in Barcelona. Well, when you come to Paris, we'll see each other." And then I said, "Well, I'm coming to Paris next week," because I wanted to know what this was about. And I found it very interesting that she wanted to see me. So then we organized an appointment at Café de Flore, and I was very scared. It was very difficult to me, and I had 2 whiskeys at the Bonaparte Café, as if it was in a Far West film, like one after the other. And then I stopped by the lying in between the Café de Flore and De Magot. I there stopped and had a look at the window of this book shop, and a man approached me and he said, I am from an alcoholic association, and name was Alcoholics, and he showed to me a card, and I thought that Sophie Calle had organized this because I was about to meet her. And I said, well, I am an alcoholic, but I am not anonymous. Well, you know, I am here. I am one of the people there on sale in this bookshop. But he didn't react, so I just kept on walking. And I got into the Café de Flore. I got into the Café de Flore through the turning door. And she was there sitting down. I just like sort of waved at her. She turned her face, and I guess she thought, what an idiot. But then I kept on walking. I sat there with her, and almost without even saying hello, she exposed her plan. She showed to me a fragment in which I was talking about this slave Petronio that was telling stories to Petronio, and then Petronio would write them down, and then they decided to these imaginary lives, and then they decided to live those lives that they had imagined, and so they ran away from Neron. So I would like you to write my life in the next half year. So I would do whatever you tell me to do. I would do anything but killing somebody. And I had the feeling that everybody was looking at us. And then the conversation went on. And then I had the impression that there was a hidden camera somewhere on the first floor of the Café de Flore. And she explained to me that her mom was about to die, so she was paying attention to that, and that is the only issue. That she would do whatever I wrote that she had to do. I went back to Barcelona, and I had the impression that a novel had already started with such a powerful start. So finally, a good idea in real life that I could talk about. But I depended a lot on Sophie Calle, so I wrote a trip to the Azores Islands, and I thought there was, on a cliff, there was an abandoned house with a ghost, and I told her everything actors had to do up until they go there, they knock on the door, and they picture the ghost, or they take a picture of the ghost. But I didn't tell them it was going to be me, because they will come back with the picture of my ghost. So she called me from Paris, and she asked me, where are these islands? And then everything sort of got delayed. And in a party in Paris, somebody else was already had already proposed this to other men, friends of mine, all writers. So this is as if she was cheating on me with all of them. But in spite of that, I sort of kept on, went on with my plan. So I wrote to her and saying, would you finally go to these islands in Portugal, to the Azores? And then she answered back with a very weird image of Paris. And then I sent back to Sergi Panis this image, a friend of mine from Barcelona. And then I said, look what Sophie is doing to me. There was an issue because I didn't send it to Gigi Parnes. I made a mistake and I sent it to Sophie herself. And then for a month I was scared. And then she reappeared in a month's time and she said, when you go to Paris, please call me. And then this is, we're reaching the end because This is too long a story. So when I went to Paris 4 months later, after the first encounter at the Café de Flore, I called her. She was very nice and very kind. And she said, well, maybe we'll see each other this evening because today my mama died. So I didn't understand anything. So I went to her hotel in the afternoon. I mean, I went to a hotel in the afternoon. I waited for her at the hotel, and she came. And she came with the camera, and she had shooted her mom's death. And it was true, the mom died that day. And for some time, I couldn't write at all. And somehow, she took me away from literature and into life. So it was very dangerous. I felt I had to run away from that. And a month later, I had a physical collapse that sort of rescued me from all this. That was the only good thing about my physical issue. So when I reappeared and I went back to life, I came back to life, I was somebody else. And Sophie called me again, and she asked me again where the Azores were. And I said, well, I don't care anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. So this was like for some 6 months, and she turned me for this. She turned me for this time into somebody that doesn't write. So this was like you ended up being one of her characters. Yes, but I didn't care. Well, that book, the title is "Porque ella no lo pidió," because she didn't ask for it. I had to make everything up because nobody would believe that Sophie called me to do this. So everything that I've told you here is real, but what I told in the book was sort of not that real. I had to wrap it up in different stories. So by means of some friends that knew her, I got her to call me because she didn't want to call me. And then I had this experience of having in my hands finally a very interesting story in my life and not being able to leave it, so I had to make it up. Well, talking about contemporary art, Alicia, you started as an artist. When do you had for the first time this possibility of combining visual arts and the art made with words? Well, I wanted to be a writer early on. And I was quite of a rebel as a teenager, and the teachers that I really liked were the art teachers. So it was kind of natural to do some studies on art. And I went to Fine Arts University, and it was like attending your Chinese restaurant without any Chinese people around. It was like, there you are, this is a school, and now it's up to you, do whatever with your project. So it was a very good school of internal epic. There you have to be in front of a table and finish a project without nothing. And I also learned a lot at the library with my friends and some teachers, but I was missing something. I didn't have an order in my ideas. So there I saw a new degree, literary theory. Jordi was one of its creators. So this was not based on national literature, but on universal Western literature. And from then on, I sort of clicked again with something that was sort of very deep in me and previous to images. But when they asked me, are you an artist or a writer? And I said, well, I don't know, I just do projects. So I see a metaphor and I sort of like get into it. And if I see snow coming, then I study the scientific area of it or aspect of it and the image. And I am going to sort of breaking down into images until I found what is happening there, why this is sort of being appealing to me. And I don't write about what I know about a fiction that I want to create, but I rather write to know what I do not know, to go beyond that limit that I know I have to go beyond. And this is by means of images and words. So writing is part of a process to get to know yourself. Yes, that's it, she says. I read something interesting when I do my research to then relate it to something that I want to write about. So you sort of do a research to find out about things that I might use later on. This is if I don't want to waste my time only reading. I mean, it doesn't sound very nice, I know, but I read. But as a second thought, I always have in mind that this might be useful for something I want to write about. Well, it's good that literature is also useful. Yes, this is why I am very free when I choose my books. In fact, you said that this new novel of you is very meta-literary, with many quotations, references on literature. Yes, but it doesn't show really, says Vila-Matas, because there is a very important literary load in it. So the narrative in it sort of covers the fact that it is very meta-literary. I wanted to ask you about contemporary art, because we said initially that you are the author that sort of approaches contemporary art in a very real way, without any prejudices, in a very positive way. Well, this is kind of a reaction to what we say in this country, that contemporary art is worth nothing. I don't think everything is like that. I think something is very stimulating. When I used to see the art belonging to the past century, some things were also very stimulating, like Velázquez, also in the previous centuries. So I think, I don't know why some people sort of neglect contemporary art per se. So, and more, the book industry is reluctant to experiment. John McCarthy explained, and I fully agree, that the equivalent to the 20s of the past century is, was that kind of literature that was risking to find new horizons. I think this is contemporary art now. And it's not so much the case in the book industry. They don't risk that much. They try to use well-known authors, because otherwise people will not buy the books. This is why I like art and literature, but I never forget literature. Yes, I think, she says, that contemporary artists visual artists are not well explained to the audience, but are part of what I call the avant-garde, cultural avant-garde researchers. You want to know what's going on, what are the new ideas. I don't know if this is due to the fact that visual art is fastest, and you always get it through contemporary art. These are the ones that are going to mention critical theories, new trends, and in the literature, sometimes you see that there is kind of a 30 years delay, or even 40, for these kind of things. Also, maybe this is due to the technique, because art is very much related to technique. And art incorporates very quickly this, the sampling. So there is a kind of a limit or their limits are always broken. So for an artist to be contemporary, the artist has to break some limits. You cannot say, I like Monet and I work like Monet. That's has no sense. I mean, so it is like I want to be an element of the present in order to open up a new path. So I think if you want to pay attention to what's going on, I think you have to pay attention to this kind of contemporary artist. Yes, Vila-Matas says, this is that curiosity that we've mentioned both in the books that I've mentioned. They were better understood in the translations in English language. There was an article on literature on the ready-made. This combination of Alicia in between her privacy and the story of vice, this combination of elements that apparently are not similar, is the same as Kubrick is doing with the space shifts, and then you are listening to Strauss of Walsh. Today I was reading the combination between Bacon and Giacometti, and now we have Giacometti with Velázquez at the Prado Museum. So these sorts of two ideas that don't seem to be alike, but then you put them together and you end up producing something very explosive and very interesting. And this comes from Marcel Duchamp, that was like the inventor of the ready-made, and books have been written on this kind of literature. But in our language, this has not been seen so clearly. I think there are common aspects in between the these two industries. Some novels are based in the canon defined by Flaubert, the kind of writing that he considered to be real in narrative. It's still what some people expect others to write nowadays. And I was interviewing Iñaki La Cuesta, and he complained about that because he works often with this dialogic montage or assembly, so with double stories. So he said that in traditional industry, in traditional film industry, sometimes he was very frustrated. So this is why experimental cinema or the new proposals are expanding towards museums. Same as dance. I mean, museums are bringing many proposals that are limited in some other spaces. So I think modern industry cannot really estimate the critical value or the capacity of readers when they go watch dance shows or performances. They're more receptive to music. But when we're reading a book or we go to the cinema, we expect to find a very traditional canon or rule. Kubrick said that some of the fans were really felt a passion for the movies, but in the Hollywood films now, some of the makers and viewers are like civil servants. They don't have that passion anymore. And I think passion is fundamental for everything. Recently, in an encounter in the Cosmopolis Festival, Tavares mentioned these artists that takes literature to the streets. And this is very difficult. Francis Ailes in Peru organized a 500 people expedition, explorers, that ended up in a dune on the outskirts of Lima. And for a day, they tried to modify in 2 centimeters the dune. This is a very silly work, but they moved that mountain. They moved that dune somehow. And Francis Ailes said that these kind of movements that are almost useless, but that serve for something, even just for those 2 centimeters, make people think that still something can be done. And this is fundamental. And Jordi Jobert, that you mentioned, talking about Kafka, he mentions that Kafka was desperate. He didn't expect any change. And we're used to saying, well, what else? What can we do if things are like the way they are? So those 2 centimeters are fundamental to stimulate people and to move on. And those 2 centimeters are what contemporary art is and modern literature. If you mention those artists, and I think contemporary artists, they are great creators of emancipating narratives that have the will to be taken to the real. And this is fascinating, really. Their approach generates a whole narrative. I'm going to do this or that. I'm going to make many people, this number of people, move a dune, even if it's only some centimeters. Yes, some people write to do life better, but some other people just write to destroy or make other people's lives worse. This is like this well-known writer in Italy that he didn't want to write, and he would, because he knew too much. And he said, I can write, I know too much. I would then get people in Torino together, so they would marry, and then he knew so much that they would divorce, but he would use this to write about them. Well, this is about art overwhelming, or having this overwhelming capacity that maybe literature doesn't have, and culture was trivialized enormously, but at Kassel still there was a certain flavor of Duchamp. It was very good for those that like the elegance of some speculations, and this is the end of the quotation that he read. Yes, I realized that my city he says that he realized that Kassel was a city that was very interesting because everything turned around art. And that's not very common. Enrique sort of sees all the different works in Kassel. Yes, that's when I decided to write the novel. I had some days in front of me, and when I paid the first visit to the Kassel Documenta, I saw a work that was it was an air current, that piece of work, but I didn't want it to be an air current. I thought it was because the windows were opened, but the whole artwork was an air current. And that was there in Kassel, and that was one of the main works. So I saw some air going through, and everything else disappeared in the museum. So there were only empty rooms without pieces of furniture, and there was a board in the wall saying that this was like the vital breathing or something. So somebody signed that air current. Well, I mean, Yves Klein bottled the air from Paris, so after that, anything can go, she says. Well, that was the thing that moved me. That was my driver to feel that I was in front of something that could lead me to write even a novel with what I would see there in Kassel. I didn't try to understand it. I tried to sort of add myself to that air current, to that impulse. and to get going. Well, some of the works that you visit are invented by you. Yes, 3 of them that I added. Because I invented a machine to print swear words or insults in front of a mountain. And then my punishment is that in an Italian newspaper said, like, now you have to draw this. Another quotation, and we will give the floor to the audience. The art faculty at the beginning of the new century is like a cemetery of a weirdo. Sometimes we see teachers, and these faculties are like temples of a Martian community or colony. Yes, that's how I saw the Fine Arts University. It was like something on the outskirts, away from the prestige areas of the city. Yeah, Fine Arts Museum is behind the architecture faculty. So you see the Diagonal in Barcelona. So that means, you know, money architecture, where the city loses its name on the outskirts. We had the Fine Arts University. And there we had the pleasure to have transsexual women. And this is not ironic. We had all these transsexual women in that area. There was also the football stadium around there, and they would go to the bar and relate to us in a very natural way. Maybe it was a place where you could not see very clearly the future, at least that was my particular case. But this was this, liminal space, geographically and from any other point of view, that would place you in a place that you could imagine anything. To me, libraries were places of really of grace, because when you live in the outskirts, in a flat that you're renting out with other students, to go to a library with heating, it's always a nice place to go, and it's a place that sort of saves your life. Now we give the floor to the audience. Please feel free to make questions.
¿Tenéis alguna pregunta? ¿Sí? ¿No? No, ¿no? ¿Sí?
¿Sí? Sí. Vale, yo tengo 2 preguntas, una para cada uno, pero igual os las podéis intercambiar.
I have a couple of questions for each of you, but maybe you could exchange them. You see, museums sort of host other practices, Alicia. I don't see museums in such a way. Why is it the museum industry so different to the film industry or to the book industry? And Enrique, in your relationship with the art people or with the art industry, is that inspiring? But have you not been not very well treated? What do you mean, he asks. Well, somebody calls you, invites you in an uncertain way, then you are abandoned in a remote Chinese restaurant. Somebody else sort of asks you and to do something that she doesn't really want you to do. So were you not sort of badly treated somehow? Maybe from this sort of mistreatment, you can find some inspiration. And Vila-Matas says, I got over it. It's okay. I met Dominique Esther that rescued me from all this. The book, Mario Baz Eléctrico, that is fully positive. And this is my relationship with Dominique, and this is thanks to Sophie Cal that gave me prestige so that Dominique would call me. Dominique was just the opposite to Sophie. She was graceful, she was perfect, she was great, and we still work together. And since that Mréjen Madolette has a book on her, and this is going to lead to an opera as well. And she was reading the book by Alicia, Mano de Hielo. Hermano de Hielo, sorry, the brother of ice. Well, to answer your question, well, museum is not an industry. So literature, well, something is literature and something else is the publishing industry. But I think through this publishing industry, literature gets to readers, same as happens with films through the film industry. And a museum, in most cases, is a public infrastructure of culture. So the starting points on how viewers or readers are seen are different. So we have different ideas. We have readers, viewers as clients, and on the other case, it's a public service. And there we are in two different sorts of starting positions. Having said this, I think that art centers and museums, as they are conceived, I think visitors are seen as somebody that they've got to challenge, not somebody to be pleased. And that's the issue of clientelism. And I think that sets a difference. I don't think that a museum is a utopia and you have to go away from cinema or from books. No, but there's a different frame, and that leads to different attitudes. Having said this, some things can only be done properly within the framework of a book. And from art, sometimes I run away towards books because there are things that I cannot do in an exhibition. And it's like that intimate communication that you have with a book. So to me, writing or exposing, only the word to expose, says it all. So a book is about revealing a secret. And you don't write to expose yourself as we are doing here now. But as we said previously with Enrique, is just the opposite. A book is a very special dialogue, a very private, that you have with the future reader. And that you do by means of a text. But it is not live. You do it and then they read it later on. So in such a way, the fact that you can read somebody that wrote it and it has been dead for 2,000 years is something very special. You don't even know if they thought they were writing it to be read so many years ago, later, sorry. And I think there's something in a book that you cannot really achieve in the framework of an exhibition. And I think, well, this is different things. So it is good to know where your message can be, which is the best way to convey your message. I don't think we are close, we are talking about close areas. It's like your body is one body. This is like a screen, folding a screen, you know, separates a space in two. But it is one only space, and same happens with art and literature. You're folding a screen, it's like a border that is meaningful. It's meaningless.
Pues muy bien, si no hay más preguntas, muchísimas gracias.
Well, if there are no further questions, thank you very much for coming. And now I'd like to remind you that upstairs there is an area that is what we call the Gutun Zuria library, and our authors will be signing books. Thank you very much once again.